this is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the very short and impressive catalogue from a musician who I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time on this series, and is one of the true legends of the bass, and is one of the most important voices for the instrument, and is one of the greatest bass players of all time. And when you hear him, you know straight away who it is, because he has such a distinct and recognizable sound, which at times is very similar to the style and sound that the legendary Jaco Pastorius made famous with the fretless bass when he was a member of Weather Report during the mid 1970s to the early 1980s. And he has seen it all, done it all, and played with just about everyone in all genres of music, from the Blackjacks with Michael Bolton, to Michael Franks, to Brenda Russell, to Marilyn Scott, to Randy Crawford, to Larry Carlton, to Jing Chi with Vinnie Colaiuta and Robben Ford, to Renegade Creation with Michael Landau, Robben Ford, and Gary Novak, to Lee Ritenour, to Eric Marienthal. He has guested with the Rippingtons, to Joe Vanelli, to Oz Noy, to Jeff Richman, to Alan Pasqua, to Allan Holdsworth, to Structure with Terri Lyne Carrington, Adam Rogers, and Greg Osby, to Mike Stern, to Nelson Rangell, to Marc Antoine, to Vince Mendoza. You name it, this amazing player has played with them all, and is also a respected and well-renowned producer, and has produced a number of different bands and artists such as Sandra Albert, Nestor Torres, Ollie Uskinskin, Rita Coolidge, and Bobby Caldwell, to name a few, and is best known for his long and legendary association as a founding member of the jazz fusion quartet, the Yellowjackets, who he played with for well over 30 plus years before leaving in 2012, and was a part of all of the band's classic lineups and co-produced virtually all of the band's catalogue of albums, as well as co-composing almost all of the band's material. And his bass playing played a huge role in not only the music, but also forging the Yellowjackets' iconic sound and musical identity, and helping to shape them into the band that we would all come to know them for. And this gentleman, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary bassist, composer, arranger, and bandleader, Jimmy Haslip. So, as I mentioned already, Jimmy Haslip, one of the greatest bass players of all time, and as I said, has a very distinct and recognizable sound on the bass. And what sets Jimmy Haslip apart from a lot of other bass players is he's a true thinking man's musician. He's not just all about technique and chops. He knows how to create very lush soundscapes and gorgeous melodies through his bass playing, and he brings a very laid back approach to everything he does. But that's not to say that Jimmy Haslip can't burn with the best of them, because he really can, and he's highly versatile and can play any style of music. So, for example, if you need full-on fusion, Jimmy Haslip can step right in and deliver that for you. Smooth jazz, Haslip's your man. Gorgeous chamber orchestral music, Jimmy Haslip's your man. There isn't anything that Jimmy Haslip can't do. He can do it all, and do it very well, and he can pretty much feel right at home in any setting or situation you put him in, because he's so damn good, and he's one of the best in the world. And I've seen him live many times, twice with the Yellowjackets, a number of times with Jeff Lorber Fusion Band, once with Allan Holdsworth and the co-led band with Jeff Lorber and Mike Stern, and he always steals the show, and his bass solos are always the highlights, no matter who he's playing with or what he's doing. So for today's edition, I am going to be taking a look at Jimmy Haslip's short and impressive catalogue, consisting of 2 studio albums. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge when you've only got 2 studio albums, but boy, what 2 amazing albums from Jimmy Haslip we've got here. Both very different from one another, both have their own musical identity and very much their own beast. But when you listen to both of them, you know straight away it's Jimmy Haslip, because as I said, he's got such a distinct and recognizable sound on the bass. And this features some of Jimmy Haslip's best bass playing, and you really get an important understanding of how integral Jimmy Haslip was to the Yellow Jackets throughout their long collaboration together. So we're going to start with the first album, which came out in 1983, and this one is called Arc. So Arc is the first album by Jimmy Haslip, and in a way you could kind of look at Arc as a continuation of the Yellow Jackets Greenhouse recording that they made with Vince Mendoza. But here, with Arc, Jimmy Haslip takes that concept to the next level and goes in a number of different directions. So this is not what you would call a burning album. This is very much a laid-back affair, but still some lovely music going on here and some great playing from the man himself. So it wouldn't be a great album without a great cast of musicians. So featured on Arc is John Beasley, Randy Brecker from the Brecker Brothers, Louis Conti, Steve Croez, who has collaborated with the Yellow Jackets on past recordings, Peter Erskine from Weather Report and Steps Ahead, Chuck Findlay, Yellow Jackets bandmates Bob Mintzer and William Kennedy, Vince Mendoza, who is an important and integral part of Arc and plays a huge role in the composing and arranging, Judd Miller, Andy Norell, Lenny Pickett, Joshua Redman, Dave Samuels from Spyro Gyra and the Caribbean Jazz Project, and the legendary John Scofield. Quite an impressive little cast of musicians. And when you got guys like John Scofield, Bob Mintzer and William Kennedy from the Yellow Jackets, and Joshua Redman, you know it's going to be a good album. And when you've got Peter Erskine on drums, you're in very, very safe hands. So let's have a look. Arc is produced by Jimmy Haslip and Vince Mendoza, and we get a little bit of sleeve notes about how the concept for the Arc project came to be, and we also have credits on who plays on what track, and we've also got some more sleeve notes and production notes here as well. So Vince Mendoza, as I said, composed half of this album. He's composed 5 of the 10 tracks that are featured on Arc, and the rest of the album is co-composed by Jimmy Haslip and another fellow musician. So the first track we got here is Outland, which is co-composed by Jimmy Haslip and Judd Miller, and it features Judd Miller on EVI, Louis Conti on percussion, Peter Erskine on hi-hat, and Randy Brecker on trumpet, and Jimmy Haslip, of course, on bass, keyboards, and drum programming. It's a very good opener and great way to kick off this amazing album. And then the next track is Old Town, which is co-composed by the rhythm section of the Yellow Jackets, Jimmy Haslip and William Kennedy. And this features Lenny Pickett on alto sax, Steve Croez on synclavier, Peter Erskine on drums, and Jimmy Haslip and William Kennedy and Steve Croez on keyboards and drum programming. Another great track here as well. and Noise, which is composed by Vince Mendoza, which has kind of got like a Latin flamenco sort of flavour to it. Features Dave Samuels on vibraphone, Bob Mintzer from the Yellow Jackets on soprano sax, Judd Miller on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards and guitar, Jimmy Haslip on bass, Peter Erskine on drums, and Louis Conti on percussion. One of my favourite tracks on here, very close to the style of the Yellow Jackets, with haunting soprano sax playing from Bob Mintzer. Judd Miller playing EVI really sounds like someone whistling. Lovely vibraphone playing from Dave Samuels. Very lovely guitar playing from Vince Mendoza. And he also provides very lush synth work with his keyboards as well. And as I said, he plays a very big part on Arc. Great track here as well. Leap, which is also composed by Vince Mendoza. It's kind of got like a Caribbean African flavour to it with Andy Narell on steel drums. We got Judd Miller again on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards, Peter Erskine on drums, Louis Conti on percussion, and of course Jimmy Haslip on bass. It's a good track, but I feel that the steel pans, or the steel drums as they're called, can get a bit tedious after a while. I mean, nothing against it. Andy Narell is a very unique musician, and he's probably the best steel pan drummer of his field, but I feel it kind of grates on me a little bit. So, although Leap is still a great track, the steel pans is a bit too much for me, but still really good nonetheless. Then we got Orange Guitars by Vince Mendoza, which is the longest track of the whole album, which is like 8 minutes long. What more can you say? It's really good. Got that Latin flamingo flavour that we heard on Noise. And this has got Joshua Redman on tenor saxophone, who I almost forgot. I thought it was Bob Mintzer. You know, Joshua Redman really plays well on here. John Scofield on guitar, Judd Miller on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards, Jimmy Haslip on bass, of course, Peter Erskine on drums, and Louis Conti on percussion. Fantastic track, one of my favourite tracks of Arc. And as I said, Vince Mendoza, unbelievable composer. Really love this track a lot. It's very long, but never get tired of hearing it. It's really good. And Judd Miller, he also plays a big part on this album. You know, he plays a lot of EVI and lots of programming, and he's been an important part of the Yellow Jackets on some of their recordings as well. I Dreamt of You, which is another Vince Mendoza composition. It's got John Scofield on guitar, John Beasley on piano, Judd Miller on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards, and Jimmy Haslip on bass, and Peter Erskine on drums. Another great track as well. Matt Ha, another great track as well, which has got Randy Brecker on trumpet, Steve Croes on synclavier, Jimmy Haslip on bass, and Peter Erskine on drums. What more can you say, really? Randy Brecker's a fantastic trumpet player, and this is the only track on the entire Arc album that's actually credited to Jimmy Haslip alone, and it's a really good one. Really, really good one as well. Then we've got the next track called Red Cloud, which is composed by Vince Mendoza. It's one of my favourite tracks here as well. It's definitely got that Vince Mendoza flamenco flavour to it. So we've got Bob Mintzer on tenor saxophone and woodwinds, Randy Brecker on trumpet, Judd Miller on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards, Jimmy Haslip on bass, Peter Erskine on drums, and Louis Conti on percussion. Another great track as well. I love the sound of it. It goes do 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 do. It's kind of got that African sort of flavour, worldly influence that you heard from Greenhouse. Really, really good. And we've also got a nice reworking of Market Street, which is a Yellow Jackets composition, and it was originally featured on the Star Trek IV The Voyage Home soundtrack. So it gets a nice reworking here, which is credited to Russell Francie, Jimmy Haslip, and Leonard Rosenman, and it's really good. It's a really nice workout here. So we got Bob Mintzer on tenor saxophone, Chuck Findlay on trumpet, Judd Miller on EVI, Vince Mendoza on keyboards, Jimmy Haslip, of course, on bass, Peter Erskine on drums, and Louis Conci on percussion, and some additional percussion by Jimmy Haslip. And I do love the original, but this version's pretty close. Yeah, it's really, really good. And then we got the closer, Hannah's House, which has got no percussion whatsoever. It's Vince Mendoza on keyboards, Jimmy Haslip on bass, Judd Mill on EVI, and John Beasley on piano. Lovely way to close the album. Very haunting, very lush, and very laid back. And for me, it's a great way to close out what has been an amazing album. So there you have it. Jimmy Haslip, Arc, fantastic debut album. Standout tracks for me are Ninoy's Orange Guitars, I Dreamt of You, Matt Her, Red Clouds, Market Street, but all of the tracks on Arc are just absolutely beautiful. So there you have it, Jimmy Haslip, Arc, fantastic debut album. So we come to the next album, which came out in 2000, and this album is very different from Arc, and this one is called Red Heat. So whereas Arc is more of a continuation of Yellow Jacket's Greenhouse, Red Heat is a much more heavy Mexican, Latin, Spanish flavored kind of album. And this really delves into Jimmy Haslip's roots. And as I said, it's a very different kind of album to Arc. Whereas Arc had some Latin influences, Red Heat has got quite a lot of Latin influences, and it's got a bit of everything on here. So Red Heat is produced by Jimmy Haslip and Joe Vanelli, who he would collaborate with on a number of different projects. And most of the compositions, with the exception of one track here, are all co-composed by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip. There are two co-compositions by Jimmy Haslip and Russell Francie, and Steve Kahn is actually credited on one track as well. But it's a really good album. It's a little bit different to Arc. The whole Latin thing is a bit much for me, but there's still some outstanding tracks, and I wouldn't say this is a clunker. It's still a very enjoyable album, and if you like the Latin thing, I think this would definitely be an album for you. So let's have a look. So there we are. There's the credits and who plays on what track. And some more credits here. And some notes here as well. So we got Los Feliz, which is co-composed by Jimmy Haslip and Joe Vanelli. And this features Joe Vanelli on keyboards and synth bass. Additional percussion programming by Jimmy Haslip and Joe Vanelli. And we got Jimmy Haslip on acoustic bass guitar and electric bass, and he provides all the horn arrangements. And we've got Steve Tavagioni on tenor saxophone, Chuck Finley on trumpets and trombone, Louis Conci on percussion, and additional percussion by Mike Chaparro on percussion and cymbals. It's a good fast-paced track to kick off Red Heat. And then we got Calle del Sol, which is co-composed by Russell Francie and Jimmy Haslip. And this features Russell Francie on piano and keyboards, Justel Almaro on flute, Louis Conci on percussion, Roz Vanelli on background vocals, additional percussion programming by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip, keyboards and drum programming by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip on electric and acoustic bass guitar as well. Another great track as well. And then we got The Heat El Calor by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip. And this is more of a duo track. This is just Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip playing everything, as well as keyboards, programming, percussion programming, and background vocals. And we got the next track, which is also co-composed by Jimmy Haslip and Vanelli, The Red Sun, El Sol Colorado, which has kind of got more of a Mexican flavour. And this has also got Jimmy Haslip and Vanelli playing everything, Judd Miller on EVI, Louis Conci on percussion, Justo Almoro on flute, and Ros Vanelli on background vocals. It's quite good, you know, as I said, the Latin thing's very strong. It has a very strong presence on here. Laguna by Vanelli and Haslip. Again, all programming, keyboards, synth bass by Joe Vanelli, Haslip on fretless bass, Mike Shapiro on percussion, and Judd Miller on EVI, and Gino Vanelli on background vocals, who's also quite a big star. Vaya, which is also co-composed by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip, and also by Shiruli, and we got keyboards and percussion programming by Joe Vanelli, electric and acoustic bass guitar by Jimmy Haslip, flute by Justo Almoro, Chuck Findlay on trumpet and trombone, and EVI by Judd Miller. And the percussion ensemble we got here is Louis Conci on, and we also got Casey Shurel, Ernesto Diaz, Paul Gonzalez, and Bertrand Lemen on claps as well. So this is probably the most Latin influenced track of the whole album, and it's quite powerful. It's quite enjoyable as well. Noveles by Steve Kahn, Russell Franti, and Jimmy Haslip, and this also features Otmar Ruiz on keyboards. Brilliant keyboard player. And we've also got Jimmy Haslip on synth bass and electric bass, Joe Vanelli on keyboards and drum programming, and additional percussion programming by Jimmy Haslip as well. Russell Franti on keyboards as well. Russell Franti and Otmar Ruiz together. That's serious. Justo Amaro on flute, percussion by Louis Conci, and Mark Craney on hi-hats and cymbals. Outstanding track. Absolutely amazing. She Never Has a Window. We got keyboards and string arrangements by Joe Vanelli, additional percussion program by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip. And Jimmy Haslip on electric bass, acoustic piano by Otmar Ruiz, percussion by Louis Conci, and Vince Mendoza on additional keyboards and synth bass. Good stuff here. Really good stuff here. And Fugo by Vanelli and Haslip. Again, horn arrangements by Vanelli and Haslip. Haslip on electric and acoustic bass guitar. Trumpets and trombone by Chuck Findlay. And Mike Chaparral on percussion, and Mark Craney on hi-hats and tom-toms and cymbals. Another great track here as well. And then we got the final track, El Moro by Vanelli and Haslip. Synth bass and programming and keyboards and drum programming by Joe Vanelli. Percussion programming by Joe Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip. And also on synth bass and electric bass by Haslip. Chuck Findlay on flugelhorns. Steve Ciavalloni on soprano sax. And Ros Vanelli on background vocals as well. Fantastic stuff here. Really good. As I said, the whole Latin thing has a very strong presence here, but still good stuff here nonetheless. So standout tracks for me are Los Fels, Cali de Sol, The Heat, The Red Sun, No Vazeles, She Never Has a Window, and El Moro. But good album, very enjoyable. If you like more of a Latin influenced album, and I think you would like this one. It's very good. As I said, it really shows you that Jimmy Haslip isn't afraid to try out different genres and different styles of music, and it really showcases his versatility. So there you have it. Red Heat. Fantastic album. So which album do I think is the best one? Well, that's pretty easy for me. Arc. Love this album. Fantastic. Vince Mendoza influence is very prominent and has a strong presence. And I look at this as kind of like a sequel slash continuation of the Yellow Jackets Greenhouse recording. And great stuff here. Some nice reworks of some Yellow Jackets classics and some great bass playing and arrangements by Jimmy Haslip and some great compositions by Haslip and Vince Mendoza. So there you have it. Arc, my favourites of the two Jimmy Haslip recordings. Fantastic stuff. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourites of the two Jimmy Haslip albums? Is it Arc or Red Heat? And what tracks did you enjoy from Arc? Was it Red Cloud, Market Street, Ninoy's Leap, or Orange Guitars? Or did you enjoy any tracks from Red Heat such as Vaya, Laguna, Los Felts, Calais de Sol? Or do you enjoy both albums? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.